Nvidia sinking. So after the chip maker disclosed that it would take a $5.5 billion hit from the U.S. government's surprise new controls on its semiconductor exports to China. For more on the latest, let's welcome in now Daniel Newman, Futurum CEO. Daniel, it is great to see you here on set. Appreciate it, from Texas. Before Jay Powell, frankly, this was the story of the day. It was chips. It was Nvidia. Nvidia is down here, Dan. It's down about 10%. It's getting clobbered in today's trade. I guess two questions to start. One, Dan, were you surprised by that news when you saw those headlines? And two, do you think down 10%, is that move justified in your opinion?
Yeah, first of all, nobody should have been surprised by this move. Really, the administration's been giving this signal that it was going to clamp down. Now, what was interesting is this week there was a bit of gyration because they cut this deal. They announced $500 billion of AI supercomputers being built here in the United States. And then a day later, he pulls back on this new export licensing requirement.
Well, to bring that up, Dan, that is an interesting point, because there were some folks who thought Jensen Huang was going to be kind of shielded from this.
Yeah, he made a deal. I had a few reporters actually hit me up. Do you think there was some tit for tat going on? And first of all, I think President Trump needs to show that there is no tit for tat. So whether it's Tim Cook bringing more manufacturing here, whether it's TSMC coming here. But I actually think on the other side of this, and maybe we come back to this, is that I actually think creating some certainty with the community, the business community, about what type of benefit they can expect by onshoring and bringing manufacturing back here, I think that would be a great start. Having said that, national security, economic security, and AI are tightly correlated. Us giving the chips to China, whether it's the tuned down chips or the best chips coming through intermediaries, which they shouldn't be getting, this is something that's giving and advantaging China. There's a lot of people out there that are like, oh, well, this is going to only push their resolve. Do you think China's waiting because we're sending Nvidia chips? They're not investing in Huawei and building their own chips. You can be absolutely certain that they are. This war, this trade war, is largely being fought on the grounds of long-term economic domination. Long-term economic domination will only be had if we control the technology trade. Nvidia is at the forefront of that trade.
And what do you think from an investor standpoint? Here you have Nvidia falling yet again, 8 to 10%. Look what happened over the last couple of days. It had recovered from its lows, right? And a lot of investors who got in short term experienced that bounce. Where do you think that looks like this week?
Yeah, I look at that line of people around the corner at $150 that just couldn't wait to buy.
Right.
And you go, what has really changed? Well, first of all, you've got GPUs melting over at X and at OpenAI. There's so much demand there. Could Nvidia pivot some of its capacity, not focus so much on building specialized products for China, and make sure we meet all the capacity and demand that's out there for companies that are in the US that are trying to build? You've got $325 billion of CapEx. And it's been reiterated. So whether it's been Sundar Pichai, whether it's been Satya Nadella, they're all planning to spend. And I genuinely believe, Sylvia, that the companies with the big operating leverage are going to look at this pullback as the moment to build AI infrastructure out. Because when we come out of this, and we will come out of this, there will be deals made. Calling that on the record right now. It may be a tough couple of months. When deals are made, we will see the economy accelerate. And those companies want to build the future and have that AI infrastructure in place. So the Googles and the Microsofts and the Amazons, they're going to buy Nvidia. And one other thing, if I may, I find it very interesting that everybody thinks that China and their push to build Huawei is going to be so successful. When AMD came out with a competitive product, no one believed they could build the software. Broadcom's making chips for the hyperscalers, and everyone said, well, that's great, but they don't have CUDA, so it's not going to work as well. But suddenly, everybody believes that China and Huawei is going to build the CUDA competitive product that's going to undo Nvidia. I believe in China. I believe in their resolve. I don't believe that they have as much competition or much competitive capability today as people are suggesting.
Can NVIDIA's H20 chips, Dan, if they can't go to China, can they go someplace else? Or is it that, no, this is a product Jensen engineered for China, so if not China, loss?
Well, that's why they're taking the charge back. Now, a lot of people are calling it a fine, and I think it's very important that we get that on the record. It's not a fine, but they've manufactured, have a certain amount of capacity. They do not believe they'll be able to sell because OpenAI, Meta, Google, they want Blackwell. They want the next chip. Even Jensen himself on stage at, most recently at GTC kind of said, like, Hopper isn't even needed that much anymore. And they were like, don't say that. But because Blackwell is so much more powerful on a token, performance basis, on a tokens per watt and dollars. Having said that, For some of these instances, for enterprises, smaller use cases, tier 2 clouds that are just trying to get more inference, I'm surprised they're not trying to figure out if there's a buyer.
If American companies like Nvidia and AMD can't export to China, you kind of hinted at this, but I want to double tap on it. Who picks that up? Who picks that business up? Is it the Huawei's? Is it homegrown local Chinese companies?
Well, as of right now,
benefits?
Yeah, as of right now, it feels like the beneficiary is going to be Chinese companies. But the real question is whether it's been China developing BYD EVs to eventually displace Tesla. And trust me, they want to do that. Or building these great Honor and Oppo phones using Android to eventually make Apple less critical. Over time, I don't see any situation in which China was going to be like, sure, we're just going to build all of our infrastructure out on Nvidia and hope that, there's never any sort of trade conflict in the future. We all know that AI is the forefront of the economic battle of the next 2-3 decades. They have to build their independence. We have to use some protectionism mechanisms to make sure, because we know they're already getting the chips other ways as well. The DeepSeek thing, that was a complete abomination of the truth. It wasn't some tens of millions. They spent billions on Hopper chips, but they pretended like they only used a low amount of chips. They're trying to compete with us. I'm not suggesting protectionism is the long-term strategy. I think innovation wins. Near term, though, we want to build as many generations of advantage in our AI as possible, because you can be absolutely sure they're gunning for us.
As a chip, let's say I'm a chip investor. I'm listening to this, Dan. I'm thinking, okay, I want to pick my spots. Dan says, what about that? Like, should I be exposed to those chip giants that have the big data center exposure? Do I want the chip names that have the consumer exposure, smartphones, PCs, autos, mix of the two?
Absolutely not the latter. Right now, with the tariff situation,
forget the latter.
Potential recessionary forces, you just heard from Fed Chair Jerome Powell. I'm worried about consumer discretionary. I'm worried about tariffs making those things even more expensive. So things like cars and phones. Sure, the higher class, wealthier people will keep buying, but I am more worried about that. I really like the enterprise AI play. So.
And that's who, Dan?
While I do think there's a bit of a pause on the Nvidia buy, like I said, all the hyperscalers that have limited exposure, but of even them, I like Microsoft the most. Almost all enterprise business, very little consumer exposure, very little ad exposure, because that kind of middle brigade of the ad group, the Meta, Amazon, and Google all have big ad exposure, which if small business gets hurt and consumer gets hurt, they will see a bit of a pullback. Microsoft has very little of that. I also like some of the enterprise applications that are going big. So I've spent a lot of time with Bill McDermott at ServiceNow. I think what he's doing with agents is very powerful. I think those companies that are building agentic workflows, because enterprises, CEOs I'm talking to are basically going to look at a downturn and they're going to say, how do I replace human capital, big expansion and CapEx with operational efficiency? Guess what? Agentic AI, the ability to replace, displace, augment, and grow your workflows and processes and people with very little input cost, that's going to be a big buy. It happened in 22 during QT. Companies went big on tech. It's very deflationary. I think if we go into a recession, we'll see a very similar action from enterprises today.
And what do you think about quantum computing and the role of chips in that and the opportunities for investors to get in there for the longer term?
So one of my dear friends, Niccolo De Masi, INQ CEO, I'm a big fan of what the company is doing. I think longer term, again, it's kind of like, are you an investor, are you a trader? Some of these names like INQ have had this incredible movement up and down. There's a ton of interest in quantum. We're just starting to see use cases and dollars flow in. But right now, if I'm getting, if I'm trying to position myself, if I'm thinking in the investor's language, I'm thinking who are companies that have revenue now, who have stable margins right now, who are going to be in demand. That's why I like the enterprise. I like AI because it's a right now thing that companies can invest in. And I'm staying away from anything that could be pushed to the future, but I'm actually very bullish on quantum as an augmenter to go work alongside of our classical computing.
Dan, final question. I asked the same question to our mutual friend Corey Johnson this week. There has been this chatter out there, and I want to get your take on this, including from some very smart people who say that mega AI trade and trend has cooled. They'll say DeepSeek changed the narrative. They'll say NVIDIA's best days are behind it. To that you say what, Dan? NVIDIA's
trading on a forward earnings basis of its value a few years ago before any of this AI was even in play. I just don't buy it. I don't buy that AI is not a mega trend for the long term. I'm an investor though. I'm not a trader. I'm not looking at these things on short term. If you're playing the short term gyrations, if you're playing every time Fed Chair Powell gets on the mic, you may see some pullback because there's a white space between this CapEx build out, these kind of Chinese ghost cities that are only generating handfuls of billions while we're spending hundreds. But in the next 5 years, the diffusion will be much faster. This is not another internet boom. So if you believe long term, you follow the trends, but I would start in the enterprise because the enterprise has more operating leverage than the consumer. As we come out of it, some of the potential of things like the next generations of PCs and phones, the cars of the future, it's very exciting stuff. I think there's an opportunity to wait and see a little more there. Buy into the enterprise. They're going to want to get efficient. They're going to want to get fast, and they're going to want to figure out how to grow through these uncertain times.